5 Iranian gunboats approached a cargo vessel in the Persian Gulf, a Singapore cargo vessel, and they opened fire, firing warning shots across the bow of this cargo vessel transiting in international waters.
Iran remains the nation that wishes the entire world to see how peaceful they really are and how evil the United States can be. And they do this by flaunting points of the planned nuclear accord, raising the price of nuclear poker in the Middle East for everyone, and now taking a few practice shots at cargo vessels in the Persian Gulf. This is just the first shot across the bow in today's arena. Welcome in political commentator and author of the book Hand to Mouth Living in Bootstrap America, Linda Tirado, and president and CEO of the James Madison Institute, a nonpartisan public policy research organization based in Florida, Dr. Bob McClure. I'm sorry for that, but welcome in, Bob, and welcome in, Linda.
Hi, Ed. How are you?
Had to get my Dr. Bob's right. There you go. Everything is good. Linda, I'm going to start with you here. 5 Iranian boats firing shots at Singapore flagged ships in the Persian Gulf. Wait a minute now. They're going to continue this? Does the United States need to get involved in any way, shape, or form, or do we just sit back, let it happen?
I mean, I think it's a little too soon to tell. We're just finding out what's going on. Clearly, there are a lot of concerns in the region that have just as big a military might and are just as capable of handling the situation as we are. So I would actually suggest that we wait and see whether anybody else is going to step in first.
Bob, though, we have to look at this from this perspective, though. This is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. The Iranians will continue to test everybody, however they can. Plus, now the Saudis say if you're going to give the Iranians nuclear weapons, we're just going to match everything on our side. You don't want to get involved because we're tired. I think many of Americans are just tired of always being this world cop. But there's that nagging feeling that if we don't do something now, we're going to pay for it later.
Well, this is certainly an issue. I mean, the reality is that because the Obama administration has kind of abdicated the United States' traditional role in that area of the world, the Iranians are emboldened. And so whether it's firing shots today or insulting allies tomorrow or declaring, war on Israel or whatever the case may be down the road, they are clearly emboldened. But I would say today, given what we have really done, in the recent past, I think we need to sit tight, learn more about this particular situation. But there's a vacuum there in the Middle East, and we have created it, unfortunately, because of an unpredictable leadership on the part of the United States, and that's something that needs to be addressed.
Well, speaking of unpredictable here, or maybe even predictable, if you will, China is now telling the United States, do not send the aircraft, do not send your ships to the South China Sea, because those are disputed waters, territorial claims, but the Chinese are... This is where they're now plying the waters. They're building small islands. And we also protect the Philippines here. So this becomes a regional issue, Bob. So then what do we do at this point? It still is the Chinese. We can't just walk in and put nukes up against their doorstep, but they are going to start threatening our allies, which means that we have a responsibility to get involved.
Yeah, the South China Sea really has been claimed by Vietnam, Japan, the Philippines, China. And really what they're doing is a military and economic strategic move on their part. And we need to aggressively respond diplomatically, perhaps economically, but we need to really respond with some sense of force. But again, because we have been so slow or kind of missing in action, if you will, in the South China Sea, whether it's China, Iran, North Korea, our enemies, if you will, are emboldened to fill the vacuum, and that's a problem for world peace.
Linda, that's interesting too, because Dr. McClure brings up the word aggressive, and that's what a lot of people say. We need to be aggressive. Even Marco Rubio and others are intimating that. But how aggressive can you really get, though? These are the Chinese. It's not as if you're going to economically sanction them into the next century or into the Stone Age. So how aggressive can you get? What chances can you take?
I mean, you have to keep in mind that at any point they could just decide to call in all of the debt that we owe them. So it's a stickier situation even than just militarily. We have to worry about the economy and what that might mean for trade. And we've got the TPP that everybody's negotiating. So, all of these concerns kind of come into play. And again, every time that we do go play world police, it winds up with ramifications 10 or 15 years down the road that we never thought of. So, we are dealing with ISIS now in the Middle East, and we're dealing with all of these groups that didn't even exist 10 or 15 years ago. So in all situations, when it comes to foreign policy, I always advise caution before we make any moves whatsoever. I mean, clearly we're going to have to get involved at some point, but to what extent and how, I think that remains to be seen. Again, this situation is just starting to unfold. So.
Just a quick answer, 10 seconds from each of you here. Linda, if the Filipino nation, if the government calls us and tells us we have to send in ships, do we immediately?
I don't know necessarily enough about the treaties, but I would say that there would be strong pressure to, for sure.
What do you think, Doctor?
Yeah, I without knowing the exact variables that you're discussing, we have to be there to defend and support the Philippines.
We have to, because it is by treaty, and it's going to be interesting. We have got 2,000 acres of land that the Chinese have now reclaimed out of the ocean, and they're just saying, it's ours, guys. Sorry, stay away. All right, if the two of you would please stand by just a moment, we're going to come back. We'll turn to politics now, because Marco Rubio is the guy who seems to be sort of manning up a little bit here. He's getting out on the trail and he's calling people out. We'll talk about that and so much more when we continue right here on MidPoint. Back to the arena, political commentator, author of the book Hand to Mouth, Living in Bootstrap America, Linda Tirado, and President, CEO of the James Madison Institute, Dr. Bob McClure. All right, Dr. Bob, I'm going to start with you on this one here. Marco Rubio says the United States is not the world police. We've got to intervene more. Wait, but we don't want to be the world policeman. Now, I get all this because he's setting himself up and he's getting ready to run. But is Marco Rubio the kind of guy that you personally would trust to have your foreign policy in the hands of?
Absolutely. I have known Senator Rubio for many, many years, from his days as a legislator here in Florida and later as House Speaker. And he would make a terrific commander-in-chief. I think Senator Rubio is trying to balance what every president who has preceded him has tried to do, and that is to protect American interests first without becoming the world's policeman. And I think, and yet that's a very difficult balance. And we've seen it with this current president, President Obama. We saw it with President Bush and President Clinton before him. That's the struggle that every commander-in-chief has.
But isn't that pretty impossible, though? Dr. Bob, isn't that pretty impossible, though, when you're talking about if you're going to protect American interests around the world, you're going to be in a lot of hot zones, you're going to be in a lot of places where people are launching attacks on us, and at times you do have to then take military action. No matter how you look at it, you're eventually going to be seen as the world cop. So, as a matter of fact, maybe being the world cop isn't so bad.
Well, I think we're talking about use of language, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, for many, many years, the oil reserves in the Mideast was a huge issue. Previous to that, behind the Iron Curtain was an important issue. I mean, yes, we absolutely have to protect American interests, and with that, being the only superpower left in the world, that sometimes can appear to make you become the police.
I think we just had him freeze right there, so let me go to you, Linda, while we go ahead and take care of that right now. Do you think Marco Rubio is the guy who has a handle on that foreign policy, and would you trust him?
I think Marco Rubio is doing a great job of throwing every foreign policy possibility out there and preparing for a run to see what floats. So you've got a guy, he's talking about arming the Ukraine, he's talking about not talking to Iran, he wants to be in South China, he kind of wants to be everywhere, but he really doesn't want to be the world police officer. I mean, I don't necessarily know that there's any single person I would trust to run the United States military interests and economic interests throughout the entire world. And the beautiful thing about America is that there is no one guy that's going to make all of those decisions at once. But right now, he's kind of throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. He's
not doing a bad job here at the beginning. I got to tell you, he's getting a whole lot of news. All right, few minutes that we have left here. Here's a couple of things to end on. The biggest ever global school rankings have just been published. Asian countries are in the top 5, African countries at the bottom. The United Kingdom in 20th. Linda, the United States is 28th. I think that's deplorable.
Yeah, no shot left behind. Totally, 100%. We can see the results working really well for us. I mean, look, we have prioritized the wrong things in our education system. We're not even teaching civics in a lot of high schools. That's problematic. We are educating a citizenry that does not understand the branches of government. So before we can get even into political questions, we really need to get down to what are we teaching and how. And then maybe we start to see that rank change.
Dr. Bob, we have even been overtaken in the rankings by Vietnam, which certainly has to, wait a minute now. Didn't this used to be the best and the brightest?
No question about it. I think you're seeing two things with those rankings. Number one, those at the top are countries that value choice and accountability in the school systems over protecting the adults who happen to be in the school systems. And that's one of the problems with the United States currently. I think the second aspect is those nations at the top also focus on quality curriculum and quality teachers, not things that don't matter as much that research shows do not matter, like class size. The third final thing that I think it's important to understand is that we as a nation and the states, for example, I live in the state of Florida. The state of Florida is not competing against states like Indiana and Nevada. We're competing against the entire world. And I think all of those are important to understand when looking at these rankings. The United States needs to prioritize choice, accountability, and measure things that matter.
That's a good point. 60 seconds left, and here comes the last one we saved. At St. Petersburg College, a pamphlet is out on sexual harassment, and it says, the tone of voice can be sexual harassment. It often is not what is said, but how it is said. Linda, do you go for that? The tone of voice is sexual harassment?
I mean, well, to begin with, I think you're looking at this the same as we have laws against loitering, which is that you can enforce them in situations in which you feel like they need to be enforced. Secondly, yes, tone of voice can definitely be sexual harassment from time to time. The problem runs into when you run into folks, especially young folks, that you're going to have a lot of miscommunication. So when we have these rules, we desperately need to make sure that we have an incredibly clear process as to how we're going to follow up on them.
Exactly. 15 seconds, Dr. Bob. What do you think?
Well, definitely, tone of voice can be sexual harassment. And I think sexual harassment is an issue across this country, but it's a thin line we have to be concerned with when you start moving universities towards speech codes that then begin to pick winners and losers, i.e. liberals and statists over conservatives when it comes to speech codes. That's separate than sexual harassment, but that's a concern. It's like playing a ball game without the rule book.
There you go. There you go. There are those rules. Linda Tirado, Dr. Bob McClure, thanks so much for joining us, both of you. We'll look forward to the next time we get to speak, and we continue right here on MidPoint.